now Pat and I are going to go over some, like a continuation of the equipment roundtable that we had earlier, but combine that with the ideas of planning and preparation for when you go out in the field. And this is like a little different than mission planning, and with a caveat where planning and preparation comes in, where that leaves off, mission planning takes off. It's like they very much go together and happen simultaneously a lot of the time. And the way I'm going to take this off is I'll give you this as cue into the next slide. Oh wait, this is not quite yet. So we'll do a little bit of introduction to the concerns, the peripheral equipment orientation. That's what I was saying, the continuation of the equipment from earlier. Some things Q&A will cover, again, getting to know your equipment and other considerations. And I mentioned they're interrelated with some of these other sessions that we'll have at other times during DroneCamp. This is a video URL. This is for your reference later when you get the presentation. It's going to cover a lot of the same stuff that Pat and I are going to talk about right now. It's just again, some of the considerations when you're going in the field. I like to try to maybe fire hose you sometimes with all the things that I wish I knew that I didn't know then, that I know the hard way now. So that's most of that, or a lot of that, comes back to knowing these little idiosyncrasies of you need to have extra like cords, that kind of thing. What things can go wrong. I can remember one time Andy and I went on a project down in Southern California, and we flew for 3 days, and all of a sudden I just dawned on me, I was like, oh my God, this is the first time in over a year that I went out on a project and didn't have some little technical issue that came up. And usually those technical issues are like, I didn't have the right cable, I didn't have the firmware updated, I didn't have like these little preparatory elements that were all not quite checked off with a healthy sense of like OCD. So that's kind of what you got to treat it with. Like, we won't watch this now. We watch it during the virtual drone camps, but since we're in person live, we'll do it live instead. Before I do that, I'm going to switch to my laptop real quick. Good. And talk about how you start thinking about mission planning. And not mission planning itself, but a project planning really. Can I do this project? Is it going to be feasible? Where is it at? Is it in controlled airspace? These are the elements that I'm oftentimes thinking about right off the bat. For example, let's say someone comes to IGIS and says, can you research this given site? First thing I'm going to do is go to the UCANR, well, actually the UC-wide web app that is the administrative.
Everyone who's virtual can't see the slides.
Application for drones across all the campuses. Just as a little background on that, Brandon's largely to the O2 for having this set up.
Hey, Sean, can you hear us?
The UC, in their wisdom, decided let's find someone that's going to be like knows the oversight, like knows the rules in and out, that can kind of oversee health and safety for drone applications, because there's a lot of liability. You might have picked up in the last session. If you do something wrong, the UC has a deep pocket. And anyone can sue anyone for anything. That can go really wrong really fast. Even if there's a even if it goes to court, yeah, even if you flew under 400 feet, even if you didn't fly over people, but you startled a cow that ran in the road and a car crashed into it. So there's anything can happen. I sometimes say, and I'll repeat myself a lot on this one, drones are kind of like the incarnation of Murphy's Law. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong, given enough time. It's just the way it is. Well, that's also with liability. You can get yourself in a lot of liability situations. So again, coming back to where I was at, the UC in their wisdom came up with an administrative structure where Brandon kind of looks over all of the UC's regulations. We're on the advisory board to the Office of the President on how we should articulate, as well as how to implement the regulations within the UC system. And
Please
each
show the screen. You're
campus
not
or
showing the
division of
screen.
UC system has their own designated person that can authorize or deny or say, oh, we need to tweak this project to be safer. And I'm the one for UC Davis and UCANR. Actually, there's another UC Davis person, fortunately. Eric Delusion's here. He's the person for UC San Diego. Pat Ian Pietro, even though not UC, you use a mirrored system of this, that you're same thing.
But I'd like to actually contrast the way that California State University has approached this problem relative to the University of California. The California State University Chancellor's office, when drones started becoming a thing, and researchers and other users on their campuses started wanting to use drones, they were like, la, 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 la. They didn't want to hear about it, and they basically left each campus to come up with their own policy and their own way of dealing with things, as opposed to the way that the UC has done it. And Brandon's Office of Excellence for UAS, being a whole system that covers all the campuses. It's a unified thing. They all know exactly how to do things safely and appropriately. And so we were just kind of left to make it up on our own. And we started off with a system for, at this campus, we started off with a system for keeping track of our pilots and having them file flight requests and evaluating them and approving or denying them. That was based on Google Forms and things like that we cobbled together. But when we adopted the same system, which is actually marketed by Risk Safety Solutions, it's actually a product that a university can buy, then things got a lot easier. There's a lot of things that could be improved on this system, but it's great. It keeps track of your pilots, your aircraft, their certifications, and it gives you a good system for evaluating.
Can you spotlight the camera so it shows up on Zoom? Can you spotlight the phone so it, okay, because this looks like what they're seeing. The one over there is what the Zoom participants are seeing with the 3 different ones at the same time.
Somebody's talking. He's unmuted.
Oh, yeah. Well, it'll be separate, only UC pertaining. So I was just, I'm making sure that those of you that are on the Zoom out there get the view here. There's a question online if we could share this website. I'd have to go and dig into the URL. It's a log, it's password protected. I'm sure the same thing for you.
It uses SSO to allow you in, which is affiliated with your institution. So
yes,
if your institution doesn't have this, you can't get to this webpage.
Right, exactly. So, but the way to do it for the UC is that you go just UC drone safety, and the web app is about 3/4 of the, well, most of the way down on the bottom right-hand side of the page. I know where to look at. I have it bookmarked, but it's that's where you'd find it for the UC. For the CSU MB, it's going to be a little bit different. Good. So anyhow, what I was going to show you, this is just going to be a screen share just on the backboard here. I could actually, you know what? Maybe I will quickly go into the Zoom. I have to do this. Uh-oh. Now I can't do that. My phone's on is actually one of the other ones showing it. Oh, well, so you'll have to just see it in the background. What if I'm going to start a project, then I could decide to fly manage a non-project or just an individual flight. I'm just going to give one here. The first thing I would do if someone asked me to do a project is I will bring up this embedded air map that shows the restricted airspaces around California. Air map, fortunately, it's been fixed. There's another version of this too. Even if it's within certain controlled airspaces, not all, definitely not all, but in some cases, I could click on there and get automatic authorization through the FAA, through the LANC system to get it to make sure that we can fly in that area. Do you have a question? Okay. So so if I want to fly there, I can click there. But if I click somewhere else, then I can see there's no restrictions for that. Then as a user within the UC system or CSUMB, you would enter in your information about your flight, who the pilot is. We have a registry of all the pilots that are out there that are logged into or registered in the system, the flight dates, field time, further details about it. And once this is all done, I would save that and submit it. Then Brandon and I get an email saying, well, you're designated as this part of the university. We look at it, say, okay, this is good, not. A lot of the projects we already are familiar with because we've been interacting with everyone doing drones in UC for years. So it's, you get a good sense of what's going on. The reason why I bring this up for many of you or most of you that might not be university, like you're not embedded within a university, is that even for a given organization, you'd want to kind of at least check yourself if you're doing this professionally in any kind of manner. Because if you're not keeping track of this, if you're flying in restricted airspace without authorization, then you can get sued pretty hard. Or if something bad goes on, there's criminal charges are really rare, but for neglect. But yeah, it's you definitely suffer some financial consequences. So that's the first thing I do when I go out. The second thing I do is I check the weather. You know what's funny is you go your Part 107. When it comes to Part 107, you'll get all these like questions about the meteorologic, the METAR system that normal pilots use. That sometimes they minimize some of these kind of crazy questions like that, but you don't have you'll never use that. You're not going to know what the runway markings are as a drone pilot. As another example. The simple way is to go and check your weather, not just the day, like a ways out, but as closer you get with weather changes. You want to look at the wind and the rain, of course, and then the cloudiness. You want to try to find the websites that are the most detailed. The worst thing, especially for thermal data, is having spotted clouds passing by. One cloud passes over while you're in the middle of your flight, so you might as well just throw away your data and then start all over again. Because it just like the thermal effect will change so much through your scene that it won't stitch together right. So yeah, always check the weather. That's what I was wondering. I wanted to spotlight the screen like we did earlier. We still probably, I think online you're seeing the 3, right? I could, but I'm transitioning out of this one now. This one's actually getting shut down now. If we could, there we go. So now we can move on to the other slides. Ideally, there we go. That's what we're looking for right there. Good. So now we can see we have the view from right out in front. Good. So now we're going to talk about getting to know your equipment, some things, again, considerations. We have all these different components that we have to consider. We are so long into the last session that I didn't do it, but I was going to pull out batteries and batteries and batteries and like pile them up on top of the cart right there, because we have mountains of batteries. That's something that fails a lot of the time. You can never have enough batteries, it seems like. Sometimes the firmware has an issue. Is there a question? We're good. Okay, so there's having lots of batteries. Sometimes batteries, these have multiple cells within them. If the cells get out of balance within a battery, it goes bad. There's ways to get around that. You can cycle them down low and then bring them back from like say 5% or 10%. That might be turning on your drone and just letting it kind of spin for a while, half hour, until it really gets low. That might be one way that you can get them all the way down. If your drone will even start and run, sometimes they won't if the battery is bad. Found a new trick recently. If your batteries are kind of a little bit out of balance, not too far, you can put them in a refrigerator and pull them out. For some reason, the smart controls inside of them kind of like reset them a little bit. that's for a little bit older batteries. But if your batteries start to swell, then you're looking at like maybe a possible major failure, if not like having it explode or whatever the case is. So the batteries go a little bit bad. You got to look out for that. The GPS, I have one of these here in, where's the case at? There it is. There's having a good GPS is really critical for a lot of projects. I'm bringing this out specifically because it's important to understand GPSs and GCPs. If we have the GCPs, I'm going to get a little bit out of order on this one here, but if you use like a Garmin GPS, you're going to have like 2 meters of maybe of accuracy in your positioning. But if you need to have know your GPS, know how to do differential correction, because just a regular GPS is going to be worse than nothing. This will calibrate to within about 5 centimeters. And so if I take one of these GCPs and lay it out on the ground, point average with my GPS for 5 minutes, usually the rule of thumb I heard from someone that worked for Emlid, I think. At one point they said that the rule of thumb is at least 1 minute per kilometer from the closest calibration station, that then you can post-process in Trimble, it's called differential correction, to get your positions exactly right. And then you use that in the mosaicing of your imagery later on to get it locked in. But it's getting to know your GPS is key. Propellers, antenna, firmware, that's another really big one. The I can't count, there's a number of times I went out into the field and found out that the firmware is old. It just wasn't going to work. Usually it doesn't stop you outright. It'll give you a warning. But then if the warning doesn't get corrected, or maybe you haven't flown it for a while and there's a newer version, it just won't let you take off and fly, in which case you're out of luck, stuck out in the field. For that reason, I recommend having a hotspot that you could download it, and you can usually maybe solve it that way as long as you have a Wi-Fi connection. Do you have a question? Over water, I don't, but RTK. But yeah, we'll talk about that, tomorrow. But the question was, how do you handle GCPs on water? That's a difficult thing. Photogrammetry is usually not done in water in general, because water is naturally reflecting and moving a little bit on its own all the time. It's like photogrammetry of water is really hard, and photogrammetry is why you have GCPs. But,
yeah, photogrammetry doesn't work well over water, but a lot of the time we use kelp mapping. You want to map the kelp canopy, and kelp canopy does fix well, but not moving around too much. So that does work well, but the areas around it that are all open water don't fix well. But in terms of GCPs on water, it's difficult to put something on the water that you can see from it doesn't move. So it's tough. I want to say one thing about firmware updates too. While having your firmware of your aircraft and your batteries and other things be out of sync can be a problem in the field, I would caution against being an avid firmware early adopter. Firmware updates come out frequently, and when they do, they often break things that were working before, and so it's good to do a little research and see other users, see if anybody's making complaints before you just jump on the newest firmware that just came out, especially if it doesn't include any improvements that you know you need. If it fixes a problem you already have, then go for it. But if not, then sometimes I'll keep some of our aircraft on really, really old firmware just because I know it works and I know it's going to work when I get to the field. So if you have to, if you're forced to, of course you have to do it or you can't fly. But if it's just some new firmware that just came out from DJI, maybe wait a little while before you grab it.
It depends. Sometimes it's easy. Sometimes you can roll back really easily. There's some firmwares that can't. There's sometimes they'll usually warn you about that, but not always. Sometimes they'll say, once you go to this update, you will not be able to go back. And sometimes you still can, but it's not easy. Oh, the question was, what can you do if you want to roll back to earlier firmware? If you apply a firmware update and you decide it's a problem and you want to go back to what you had before. And so the answer is sometimes you can, sometimes you can't.
Yes, good question. Another thing too, knowing your equipment, your tablets. If there's something that's going to fail mechanically, it's going to be your tablet or your wires. This is not as much of a problem with iPads. The wire isn't, that isn't. The iPads are really sensitive to heat. And so if you're out in a hot environment, they'll overheat, and some will give you a warning. Some will just go and they're out. And if you're not like well within your line of sight flying, then that's a major problem. For peripheral kind of things, I've set up like the air conditioner. I'll run when I fly sight scan on the iPad with the Matrice 300. I have a really long iPad cord, and I put it underneath the air conditioner in my truck just so it stays cool all the way through the mission. And that's the best way I've found that it doesn't overheat. Sometimes having the sunshades good, but it's oftentimes not enough. I've taken ice packs and put them on the backs of the drones to kind of help out a little bit. But yeah, there's some things like that you might consider. But if it's on an Android, especially before they switch to USB-C, the old micro USB plugins, those things notoriously failed. They're just so easily, that's caused more problems than I can count. So having that set up, getting the right apps on there, and again, having a hotspot is really handy if you have to update your mission planning apps or your apps in the field. Sometimes you'll get a warning saying that you can't fly until you do an update on, say, your DJI Go or something like that, which is not uncommon. Sensors, memory cards. I have a whole ton of memory cards around here, somewhere in this green case I have down here, that of both USB micro SD cards and the full-size SD cards. But this is a side note when it comes to knowing your equipment. When it comes to your memory cards, certain sensors will only work with certain formats. And a great example is the Red Edge in the Altum. I just ran into this recently. This is kind of a funny, weird thing. The Altum comes with this stick. It's a USB stick that goes in there. And the one that I had came naturally in exFAT was the formatting, but for the Altum to run reliably, it should be in FAT32. And so it has to be that. And in FAT32, you have to get a special utility to format it out to be in about beyond 32 gigs. And that's like 128 gig card. So there's having what cards go with what drones, and I prefer not to match them. I know I went out on a project one time, I mixed and matched mine between two sensors. Another person I was out with did the same thing. They were out for 3 days collecting data. I was out for 1 day. We got 0 drone data for the whole entire campaign. There was like 6 of us out there in the field, luckily only for 1 day for me. But that was because we mixed them up, pulled it off. It looked like a Russian hacker had gone wild with the code, and it was just, it was ruined. So yeah. Your sensors, some of them need batteries, most of them don't, but the illumination sensors, the IMU, that's a little bit different. You have to do calibration sometimes, at least initially when you get them. Some of them, like the Parrot Sequoia, you have to orient them in different angles for it to get the inertia measurement. And when I mean IMU or inertia measurement unit, that's kind of like your digital gyroscope that gives that writes to the images, and what they have a EXIF file. It'll write the telemetry data from the drone to those. In some cases, sometimes it's from the sensor to the camera images. that will be written across. And then couple of last things, flight controller, batteries, antenna, you have to consider those too. Some controllers you can plug in like an external battery and it'll keep it alive. But if your controller's power goes all the way out, you could have problems. In theory, your drone should know where your home point is and come back and land if you lose your controller. But I've had return to home fail on me more than once, actually several times. So just something that you want to look out for. Oops. How do I get going to the next slide? There we go. Good. So this would be having manuals, YouTube, like us geospatial nerds, we love to put stuff up on YouTube. By the way, the IGIS has a YouTube channel that has a bunch of stuff, including an old bunch of DroneCamp presentations. But you can find most things that you're looking for online. How to do your firmware, for example. A lot of drones, like the old conventional ways, you download the firmware, put it in your camera, turn on your drone, let it blink for quite a while, and then it's good. Some of the newer drones, you have to connect cables and through some kind of utility that you have to download. But you can find that information for your given platform online. Or sometimes you just ask someone that you need that information from. Yes.
When and how often would you need a calibration panel for the microsense?
Okay, when and how often, the question is when and how often would we need a calibration panel for something like a MicaSense? I believe there's some slides and that's a good timing to get to this. What I have here is a white panel. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll repeat it. So to calibrate for reflectance, you find out what the downwelling of sunlight is, and then divide what's received at the sensor by this calibrated white value to get a reflectance that you can repeat day to day, because then the light conditions change. You still know what more or less the reflectance of the surface is. The question is, how often do you get this? And when? The when is pretty much anytime you're collecting multispectral data, you'll want to have this, always. But you only need to do one good image of the white panel per process. So if say you're flying 5 flights and you're going to process them all separately, you'd want 5 white panels. If you're going to do like 4 quadrant flights where you might fly here, 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 and they're in like consecutive order, you might stop in the middle and take one of your white panel. Having extra isn't a bad idea. You might want to take them like at the beginning, the middle, and the end, and then just remove the ones in the end and use the one in the middle. You use the white panel set in the processing one time per process. If all your flights are close in time and they're all like they're against each other or overlapping, then you can use just one white panel. But there's the rest of the time you'd use the rest of the time you'd collect more white panel calibrations. Yes. No, not the DJI app. So the question was, is there settings in the DJI apps that we should adjust to kind of compensate for different lighting conditions? That's, I guess, yes, in some circumstances. And so you want to have auto exposure set most of the time, but not always. There's certain circumstances where you don't want auto exposure set, but that's almost strictly speaking for RGB imagery. You don't worry about it for your multispectral stuff because the calibration with the target is what's doing the calibration there. And then the illumination sensor on the top is can kind of adjust it a little bit more. The rule of thumb that is presented on the how-to of Pix4D and Metashape and other photogrammetry sites is that if you have kind of like varying lighting conditions, then you'll want to use, you'll in the processing, you'll activate the illumination sensor values, but the rest of the time you want to just use the white panel.
And to be clear, the calibration panel, to do that calibration, you're doing that on the ground. That's not from the air. It's just a little tiny square, and you hold the camera about waist level above the panel and get an image of it with the camera manually by clicking it. So, and then that gets used in post-processing. I think on the photo, it's more of a photography question, really. And if you're an avid photographer and you know about setting for the conditions and you know how to set your aperture and other things and do it manually, well, then that's fine. Most people go with auto exposure and everything. I'll say with the caveat, the Mavic 2's camera chronically overexposes. And so sometimes you want to tweak that, especially on a real bright day.
Oh, one thing that I should mention though, before I move on and forget all about it, is the ground control points. You can have different ones. These ones are lightweight, so we bring them to things like this. I also have big white boards that I use for thermal ground control points. Sometimes you need ground control points, sometimes you don't. That's something to consider ahead on your project. The point of ground control points are usually twofold. One, or for two different reasons. One, you might use it for data fusion. Say you have a thermal camera and a RGB and a multispectral camera, and you want to process them. And so they're right off the bat, they're all in alignment. And that's without using the post-processing that Becca mentioned earlier, where you can do auto adjust, geopositioning, ArcGIS Pro, which is really slick now. I just discovered it recently and wondered where it's been all my life. But there's, but yeah, to get everything in alignment, that process in at least ArcGIS Pro might not work so well with thermal imagery to other imagery. It's like just too different. But that's one reason is data fusion. The other reason is if you're going to fly the same location over and over again and you want to do change detection, you might need those ground control targets. So that's kind of your flight planning and preparation considerations.
Is that white calibration say between battery changes?
Yes, you do. You can do that. Yeah, between battery changes. That's where I was kind of getting at, where if you're going to process them, I'll just put it out there and record it once. And I know I'm going to stay within an hour of solar noon. So the question was, do we change the white panel between every battery change? That's sometimes not. If I'm going to fly once and then continue the same mission and continue, process it all together, I only need one image collection.
To clarify one more thing, the white panel image that you save is not doing anything to the camera. It's not calibrating the camera in real time. It's just an image that you then use in post-processing. You tell the software, here's my calibration image, and you give it values for the different bands, RGB, near infrared, red edge, that the manufacturer has given you for that particular panel. And the software then in post-processing uses it to calibrate your multiband imagery. But it's not doing anything to change the camera settings in real time as you take an image.
Well put. Yeah, that's important to know. So just one little comment, getting your equipment ready. You can put stickers on your equipment. Having lists is a good thing in general. I think that's a cheat sheet. Having cheat sheets, we mentioned that earlier, mention it again. Once you've flown 100 missions, you'll still forget something sometimes. So having a checklist is really good. And you can find all kinds of checklists. Sometimes it's best to build your own checklist. So there's, but again, you'll have access to this here very soon, or tomorrow, since we're going to have the social tonight. Having log sheets. If you're not doing that like drone recording app, which we kind of spoiled this, where we keep I can look back at all my flight records if I need to. Otherwise, running and maintaining log sheets for how many flights are good. Another thing that I do is I number my batteries. So I know if one is kind of getting sketchy, I will mark that as, I'll record that battery has maybe too much life on it. And so or not enough more life left is another way to put it. So I keep that in mind too. So yeah, keep track of what's going on with your equipment is really the moral of this story here. Field notes and post-mortems. So if something does go wrong, you want to keep the records of what happened, particularly if you have a chance to put in like a insurance claim, but also in case there's a liability considerations that you might want to keep in mind. So looking at what worked, what didn't work, we might not even be talking about like a catastrophic crash. I mean, but that's a good way. Like sometimes people say that FAA laws are written in blood because they're there because something really went wrong. Well, there's nothing that'll teach you how to not do something wrong, like having something really crash, but learn everything you can from what does go wrong, even the little things, and then improve upon your system thereafter. Practice, practice, practice. So just keep on working with it. Things will go wrong, but if I like to say, keep a healthy sense of OCD, and it'll keep you from having those things go wrong. Here are some airspace statistics that are from the analytics of our UC drone reporting that look at like what flight purposes and what areas things occurred in, what the risk ratio for some of the flights are. If we had another pane, it would also show what the was the cause of a lot of the problems. Most of the time it's user error. So that's the vast majority of the time. And no, this is, I think this is, password for administrators. Already talked about checking the weather. Solar noon. Ideally, when you plan your missions, you want to fly near solar noon. And that's most important in the wintertime. The idea is you want to have the least amount of sun angles from like looking down at nadir. When you get your orthomosaic stitches together or your processing together, you want to have the best view possible, and that's near solar noon. In the winter months, when the sun is already low in the horizon, that's most critical. The other thing is then sometimes you're not focused necessarily on the spectral characteristics of a canopy. You just want to get like a good visual, or maybe you want to get a good elevation model. If you get later into the day and like say the twilight hours, shadows are moving so fast a lot of the time that when you put it through your photogrammetric processing, those shadows will have shifted from each one of your flight lines enough that it'll mess things up and you just won't get as good or accurate data. It just won't look good.
We had a question about GCPs on water. I want to qualify the solar noon thing. If you're doing research over water, CPAS mapping, kelp canopy, anything like that, you want to not go at solar noon because you get a lot of glare. So about less than a 45-degree sun angle is probably best for operations over water. Depending on whether you need to see through the water or you're looking for things on the water surface, that can affect things. But with the sun straight overhead, you'll end up with 2/3 of each of your images will just be whited out glare, and it won't stitch well.
And then sometimes you want to plan your mission, which I just did in the last couple of weeks, is planned so when your low tide coincides with the solar time. So you have to plan your project out like weeks ahead of time sometimes as well. Question.
Sometimes the advantages of the lowest possible sun angle to reveal surface texture.
Oh yeah, that's a good point. So there's a statement, not a question. So sometimes you want the lower sun angles to reveal surface texture. I mean, there are cases where that might be in consideration. So it's just we're going to do questions and so forth for the next few minutes, but I want to touch on a couple things that people don't think of a lot of the time is having water. We'll have these out there tomorrow. We have a couple sprayers. I also usually have a bucket of water. The reason for this, and I have a fire extinguisher here somewhere, a chemical one. Chemical sprayers on burning grass does not work really. You need to have water, and sometimes you want to wet the line in the direction that the fire is moving, not so much where it's at right now. So having extra tools in the field, that's always a key thing. Having sunblock. Tomorrow, get sunblock. It's supposed to be the sunniest day of the week tomorrow when we're out flying. It's luck turns out that way, so we don't have that 3-mile limit, the fog kind of issue. but hopefully, speak now, but hopefully that holds tomorrow. But have sunblock. Lots of times I've seen people get burned, and I've been burned a little bit myself. Have water. One of the biggest problems with user error with drones is mission focus, where you're so focused on what you're doing that you don't even realize that you haven't drank water in 2 hours and you're in the sun. And I know a lady that actually had to go to the hospital. She collapsed because of heat stroke, not even realizing what happened. We had someone at DroneCamp, our first DroneCamp, someone had heat stroke because they weren't drinking water. They're just so into this. You get excited, and it's easy to have those kinds of things happen. Let's see, any other considerations that you might throw out there, Pat?
Other things that are good to bring along. I think Sean had a slide in the earlier presentation from today that covered some of these things, but things like a power block, a source of DC power that it's basically just a big battery, but that you can use if your tablet battery starts dying on you or something like that, or your cell phone and you're using your cell phone for a hotspot or something like that, you can power off. These are just a big version of those. It's a lithium-ion battery pack. That's this one puts out about 300 watts. It's about 300 watt hours, so it really only will go for an hour at that level. But you can charge batteries using one of these on the fly while you're flying. If say you're flying a Mach 2 and you want to do a very large mission and you want to keep flying for a long time, if you have 6 batteries and you have enough of these, you can cascade your batteries and put one on charge. As soon as you land, you take it off the drone, you put it on charge, and you put a fresh one in. By the time you've done your 6th flight, the one that you put on originally is done, and you can keep flying continuously without having to stop. Another good thing to have is this is made by DJI. It's called a DJI Copilot. It's a way to get the data off of your SD cards. Have a computer. You just plug an SD card right into it. It's got a hard drive inside of it and a battery, and it will just automatically, with a push of a button, copy everything off of the SD card onto here. You don't get to look at it. You don't get to know whether it has good data, but at least you can see the volume of data, and you know that you've got everything backed up. This is called a DJI Copilot. There's another one with a cooler name. This is a Narbox, it's called. These are a lot more, those are a couple $100. These are a lot more expensive, but they're more robust, and they actually come also with some data management software that's optimized for photography and for drones in particular, where it will actually organize your data by geographically into folders and things like that. So it's probably, I think it's closer to $500 or $600 if I remember right, but that may not be correct. But it's Narbox, GNAR box.
Since we're right at the end, I was going to leave you with a couple, like you could thank me laters for these ones. One, wearing a hat's really nice. Having sunglasses is great. Sometimes the polarization makes it so you can't see your tablet. So having a hat's nice. It's also nice when you're in the field. You can use this as like a sight plane to your drone with your hat shading you so that you can look at the tablet and see your drone at the same time without losing track of it. So that's kind of a nice handy trick. But just having a hat in general in the field is really nice. Again, having sunblock, sometimes we'll bring sweaters, or even in hot environments, just to keep the sun off of you for hours at a time. That's a handy thing to have. And then the one other one, the thank you later, getting compressed air is really nice, especially when you're in dusty environments and you want to get dust off your lenses of your camera. Like, you don't want to keep on rubbing over and over again. That'll ruin your lenses over time. So get a good spray of compressed air will clean off, just clean off your equipment and that sort of thing. It's really handy over time. And with that, I think I don't want to run too long because I got to give the next session a we will, we've had questions throughout, but we'll continue to answer questions this afternoon afterwards, and then at the social as well. So, any last comment?
All good. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.